Before the rest of the town even opened its shutters, another world was already awake. Long before sunrise, while the streets were still cold and quiet, the people who supplied medieval markets had already begun their work. Bakers were finishing their first loaves, farmers were unloading baskets in the dark, traders were arranging stalls under weak lantern light, and porters moved goods through empty squares that would soon be crowded. For many, the day truly began not at sunrise, but in the hour just before it. Tonight, we're going to step into that early morning world and see what medieval towns looked like at dawn, how markets prepared for the day, who arrived first, how goods were transported, and why so much work needed to happen before most people even woke up. But before we begin, tell me in the comments, if you lived back then, which early morning job do you think you'd handle best? Baking, trading, transporting goods, or preparing a stall? Your answers help decide future videos. And if you enjoy these calm journeys into forgotten corners of history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you never miss a new bedtime story from the past. Now let's begin. The market at dawn, life before sunrise. Before medieval towns filled with the familiar daytime noise of carts rolling over stone streets, craftsmen calling out orders, and shopkeepers opening their shutters, there existed a quieter layer of life that belonged only to the earliest risers. These were the people whose work had to begin before sunrise so that everyone else could begin their day smoothly. While the majority of townspeople still slept behind heavy wooden doors, another set of routines was already underway. A medieval morning did not begin with the ring of a clock or a scheduled time. It began when these early workers quietly set the day in motion. Understanding their world means looking at the hours before dawn, a space of time shaped by necessity, routine, and the careful coordination of small tasks that supported the rhythm of medieval daily life. The earliest signs of movement in a medieval town usually came not from people, but from the environment. Streets retained the coldness of the night. Air hung still. In many towns, mist drifted between buildings, collecting along alleyways or settling over markets that would later become the busiest places. Cobblestones glistened slightly from dew. Wooden shutters remained closed except for a few scattered windows in bakeries or workshops where low lights hinted that someone inside was already working. This stage of the morning, when the town was awake only through faint traces of early preparation, created an atmosphere that felt both silent and expectant. Those who rose before sunrise did so not out of preference, but because their work required it. Bakers were among the first to stir. Their ovens needed time to heat properly, and bread needed hours to prepare. This meant that the first movement inside towns typically came from bakeries, the gentle scraping of firewood being arranged, the muffled thud of dough being kneaded, or the soft glow of an early flame flickering through a bakery's small window. The earliest breads baked in the morning were often intended for vendors who would begin selling by sunrise, supplying households that depended on fresh bread for meals throughout the day. Farmers who traveled from outside the town also needed early starts. Many lived several miles away, and the journey on uneven roads required time and patience. They loaded wagons with vegetables, grains, dairy, or simple goods during the last hours of the night, then began moving toward the town's gates while darkness still covered most of the landscape. Because medieval towns often opened their gates at scheduled intervals, farmers timed their arrival to coincide with gatekeepers preparing to begin their day. It was common for small groups of farmers to wait near the entrance until the gates opened, their breath visible in the cool morning air, their carts still and quiet in the dim light. Inside the town, workers responsible for transporting goods between markets and storage areas also began early. Porters, who carried heavy baskets or crates across town, often worked in the hours when streets were empty. Moving through quiet alleys allowed them to cover longer distances before daytime crowds slowed progress. Their work relied on understanding the layout of the town better than almost anyone else, knowing which alleys connected, which passageways were easiest to navigate with heavy loads, and which routes allowed them to move quickly from bakeries, warehouses, or workshops to the central market square. The atmosphere of the pre-dawn market square was distinct. During the day, the square served as a social and commercial center. Before sunrise, it was much quieter. The only sounds came from workers setting up stalls, moving wooden boards into place, or adjusting ropes that held makeshift coverings. Many vendors arrived well before the sun so they could claim good positions, arrange their goods carefully, and prepare for the rush of customers who depended on them. Candles or small oil-based lanterns offered faint illumination to guide their early work. As they arranged baskets of produce or set up stands, they made decisions about price, layout, and presentation long before customers appeared. Markets required preparation beyond simply setting up stalls. Workers responsible for maintaining the area performed tasks that had to be completed before dawn to avoid interfering with daytime traffic. They swept the central square, cleared debris or leftover dirt, repositioned barrels, and ensured that pathways remained clear. If the market included permanent stalls, these needed inspection. Loose boards were tightened, coverings adjusted, and small repairs made. Though these tasks might seem minor, they created the essential structure that allowed the market to function efficiently once crowds gathered. As dawn approached, the town's appearance changed gradually. Lantern lights flickered in a few more windows. The soft noise of wheels rolling over stone grew slightly more common. A farmer leading a cart quietly through narrow streets, a porter carrying baskets toward the market, or a baker stepping outside to check the air. All these subtle signs indicated that the town was transitioning from night to early morning. The streets, still mostly dark, began to reflect a sense of direction as the earliest workers completed their first routines. The organization of labor before sunrise reflected the practical needs of medieval society. Without modern lighting or dependable clocks, workers developed a keen sense of time through experience. A baker, for example, knew how long dough needed to rise before baking, calculating backward from the expected arrival of customers. A farmer understood the timing of the journey into town based on the rhythm of livestock, the condition of the roads, and the opening of town gates. Porters worked according to the expected arrival times of goods, preparing their routes mentally long before stepping out onto the street. Each group relied not on strict schedules, but on familiarity with patterns passed down through generations. Many of these early workers organized their routines with considerable precision. A baker prepared dough the previous evening, covered it carefully, and woke before dawn to shape and bake it. A vendor selling fish needed to arrive early enough to prepare the display before the morning heat affected freshness. A seller of dairy products carried goods that required stable temperatures, making the early hours ideal for transporting delicate items. These tasks, performed in darkness or faint morning light, required trust and routine. Workers knew the texture of dough well enough that they could shape it without fully seeing it. Farmers recognized the creak of wagon wheels or the feel of the road underfoot. Candlelight provided minimal illumination, so workers developed techniques that relied as much on touch and sound as on sight. In the hours before sunrise, the town's early workers also formed small, temporary communities. Farmers arriving at the gate exchanged brief greetings with one another. Porters recognized familiar faces and coordinated movements to avoid overcrowding narrow paths. Vendors sharing similar stalls or market sections offered quiet assistance, passing tools, or helping adjust coverings. These interactions were rarely loud or lengthy. Instead, they reflected the practical cooperation necessary to start the day efficiently. Even without formal organization, these workers understood how to move around one another with practiced ease. Weather influenced the early morning routines significantly. During winter, cold temperatures made pre-dawn work physically demanding. Frost settled on produce. Workers wrapped themselves in layers of coarse fabric. The darkness seemed heavier, and dawn arrived later than expected. Yet work continued because the market needed to begin on time. In summer, dawn came early, but pre-dawn hours remained cooler and more comfortable than the midday heat. Farmers took advantage of these cooler hours to move perishable goods quickly. Candlelight or lanterns guided them through the dimmest hours until first light made navigation easier. The transition from night to morning was gradual. As the sky shifted subtly, early workers adjusted their pace. They recognized when it was time to complete the last tasks of preparation, when to uncover produce, when to extinguish lanterns, and when to expect the first customers. Dawn served as a silent signal that their pre-sunrise work was nearly complete. By the time the sun finally rose, the market square no longer resembled the quiet, dark space it had been hours earlier. Stalls were arranged neatly. Goods were displayed. Bakers delivered bread. Porters completed their last rounds. Farmers positioned their carts. The square transitioned from a place of preparation to a place of activity. Most townspeople, just beginning their day, never witnessed the hours of labor that made the market appear ready. They arrived expecting it to be prepared, unaware of the organization, movement, and coordination that had taken place in darkness. This hidden world before sunrise reveals much about medieval life. Survival depended on cooperation, routine, and predictability. Early morning workers understood their role within the wider community. They provided the foundation upon which the rest of the town's day depended. Their efforts remained largely unseen, yet they shaped the success of markets, the rhythm of commerce, and the ability of households to begin their morning tasks smoothly. As the town fully awakened, the day's activity spread from the market outward. Carts continued arriving. Shopkeepers opened their shutters. Children stepped into the streets. Traders called out prices. But behind all this familiar movement remained the quiet layer of life that had begun long before sunrise, an essential part of medieval society that operated steadily in the background, maintaining the continuity of daily life through the careful, steady work of those who embraced the earliest hours of the day. Long before a medieval market could function, a long chain of unseen work had already taken place in the hours when most people remained asleep. The early morning bustle that filled the market square after sunrise depended entirely on the quiet labor of producers, farmers, and suppliers who began their routines in darkness. Their tasks were not glamorous, yet they formed the backbone of the marketplace. Without their consistency, the stalls would open empty, the bread counters would stand bare, and the early lines of buyers would have nothing to choose from. Understanding these pre-dawn workers reveals how medieval society relied on coordinated labor that stretched across fields, workshops, and rural roads long before the sun rose. The story begins in the rural outskirts of medieval towns, where many producers lived. These producers included small-scale farmers, dairy workers, gatherers, millers, fishermen in certain regions, and craftsmen who created goods meant for morning sale. Their work often began before midnight, especially when the journey to town required several hours. Farmers who brought vegetables, fruits, or herbs planned their schedule carefully. They harvested fragile items such as leafy greens or berries during the coolest hours of the night to preserve freshness. Even vegetables with longer shelf lives, like root crops, benefited from early harvesting because the lower temperatures helped maintain firmness. These early tasks were performed by torchlight or by relying on familiarity with the fields. Experienced farmers knew the layout of their land so well that even limited visibility posed little difficulty. Producing dairy goods required an even earlier start. Milk had to be collected from animals before dawn to be ready for transport. Dairy workers rose in the deepest hours of the night, preparing buckets, checking on livestock, and starting their routines. The quietness of the pre-dawn barn was broken only by basic tasks: the movement of animals, the sound of buckets being placed, or the measured rhythm of workers completing each step. Fresh dairy products were highly valued in the morning market, as they needed to be sold early before warm temperatures affected quality. Butter churned before sunrise and fresh cheese pressed during the night reached the market at the ideal time. These workers did not have the luxury of adjusting their schedule for comfort. The temperature of the night dictated the pace of production, and markets depended on their precision. Millers working near rivers or small streams also contributed to the pre-dawn economy, though they did not always need to begin their labor as early as farmers or dairy producers. Millers often ground grain in the night to meet morning demand. Millstones turned steadily in low light, releasing the familiar sound of grinding grain, a rhythm that became part of the unseen soundtrack of pre-market preparation. They had to manage moisture levels carefully. Flour that was too damp spoiled quickly, while flour that was too dry lost quality. By the time the first traders reached the market square, sacks of fresh flour were already prepared and ready to load. Fishermen in coastal or riverside towns operated on an entirely different schedule. Their routines were determined by tide, wind, and season rather than by clock or habit. Many fishermen returned from nighttime trips only moments before the market opened. Their boats arrived quietly at the edge of the town's waterways, carrying nets filled with fish caught hours earlier. In regions where fish sales formed a major part of the morning market, these early arrivals shaped the pace of the entire town. Porters waited at docks to transport baskets quickly inland before the morning crowd arrived. The brief window between an overnight catch and morning sale was crucial. Freshness determined price and demand. and fishermen learned to move quickly. Markets in such towns depended on these early morning rhythms, with entire sections of the market prepared around the timing of fishing routes. Another group essential to pre-dawn preparation came from workshops inside the town. Bakers, as mentioned previously, rose before anyone else in the urban setting. Their ovens needed time to heat properly. Bread dough prepared in advance had to be shaped, rested, and baked before morning customers arrived. Larger bakeries often operated through the night, with workers rotating tasks to meet demand. The warm glow from a bakery oven became one of the earliest lights visible in town, signaling the start of economic activity long before the sky shifted color. But bakers were not the only urban producers working at such early hours. Some craftsmen, particularly those whose work supported the food industry, also began their tasks before dawn. Butchers preparing items for morning trade performed basic tasks early to ensure their goods were ready. Though heavy processing typically occurred later in the day, early preparation ensured smoother operations once the market opened. Food vendors relied on such preparation to present clean, organized goods to customers who expected fresh options early in the morning. Transporters, often overlooked in written history, played one of the most important roles in connecting producers to the market. These individuals or small teams worked in the hours before sunrise, moving goods along rural roads to town gates or transporting items from workshops to the market square. They knew the shortcuts, slopes, and pathways that allowed them to cover distance quickly even in low visibility. Their work required physical strength and experience. Carrying baskets, hauling crates, or guiding animals over uneven terrain before sunrise demanded concentration and familiarity with routes that were difficult even during daylight. Transporters often formed relationships with the same farmers or craftsmen, creating routines that allowed goods to flow efficiently into town. The roads toward medieval towns had a specific rhythm in the pre-dawn hours. Farmers traveling toward the gates did so in small groups for companionship and practical assistance. If a wheel loosened or an animal halted, help was close at hand. Roadside inns, if present near the outskirts, sometimes offered lantern light for those who traveled particularly early. These inns catered to travelers who needed to pass through before sunrise and provided warm shelter before final departure. In colder seasons, farmers often paused briefly to warm themselves or ensure their goods were protected from frost before continuing. The arrival of these early workers at the town's gates marked a significant phase in pre-dawn activity. Gatekeepers were among the first urban workers to rise. They opened the gates at consistent times, ensuring that trade could begin in an orderly fashion. Farmers and suppliers learned these schedules through experience and structured their journeys accordingly. In some towns, gatekeepers also recorded the arrival of certain goods or checked loads for taxation purposes. This administrative step formed part of the invisible machinery supporting the morning market. Inside the town, porters and early rising vendors waited for these arrivals. They recognized familiar carts or producers and began assisting immediately. Some helped unload goods, while others moved items directly to assigned stalls. The relationship between producers and vendors was practical and built on routine. Both parties benefited from early organization. Choices made in these moments influenced how the market looked at sunrise. Vendors decided where to place goods, how to arrange produce, how to stack baskets or jars, and how to present items at eye level for customers. For many items, especially perishable goods, presentation mattered. Vendors laid out vegetables carefully, keeping delicate items such as herbs or berries near shade or under simple coverings. Root crops or grains were placed in larger piles. Dairy products were kept in insulated containers or positioned near shady parts of the market square to preserve quality. Fish vendors prioritized rapid setup to maintain freshness, arranging their displays in ways that allowed customers to evaluate the quality easily. These actions happened quickly and quietly, often with only lantern light guiding the vendors' hands. The quiet cooperation among early workers formed a kind of informal system. Producers relied on vendors to handle the final stage of sales. Vendors relied on producers to supply consistent, quality goods. Porters relied on both groups for steady work. Each member of this interconnected network understood their role clearly. The system functioned not because of official organization, but because of shared expectations shaped by generations of practice. Weather played an influential role in all these activities. Rain complicated early travel, turning roads slippery and slowing farmers' progress. Frost hardened soil but made produce brittle, requiring careful handling. Heavy winds disrupted lanterns, made carrier baskets sway, and scattered loose straw or cloth used for covering goods. Despite these challenges, producers and suppliers rarely deviated from their early routines. Their livelihoods depended on predictable presence in the morning market, regardless of circumstances. In summer months, early morning work felt different. Temperatures were more comfortable, and roads were easier to navigate. Produce remained fresh for longer. Farmers began their journeys slightly later because daylight came earlier. Transporters moved quicker without worrying about icy roads or freezing temperatures. This seasonal variation shaped routines throughout the year. Pre-dawn activity remained essential, but the difficulty of tasks fluctuated depending on natural conditions. In winter, early morning labor required endurance. Darkness lasted longer, temperatures dropped sharply, and goods had to be protected carefully. Warm breath rose into cold air as farmers positioned their carts, and porters kept moving to maintain body heat. Yet even in these challenging conditions, the system persisted. Medieval communities depended on these early workers, and the workers understood their place within the broader rhythm of the town. As dawn approached, the movements of these early workers aligned. Producers completed their deliveries, vendors finished arranging their goods, and transporters concluded their rounds. Candlelight or lantern flames dimmed gradually as natural light took over. The market square, now fully arranged, transitioned from a workspace to a commercial center. By the time townspeople stepped into the streets, everything appeared organized and ready, as if it had happened effortlessly. But behind that seamless appearance lay hours of quiet, steady work performed by those who had begun their day long before anyone else. This hidden world of pre-dawn producers and suppliers reveals how medieval towns relied on cooperation more than formal systems. Their work ensured that markets opened smoothly each morning and functioned consistently throughout the year. The careful coordination of producers, transporters, vendors, and gatekeepers formed the foundation of the medieval morning economy, an economy built not on wealth alone, but on discipline, patience, and trust. As dawn approached in a medieval town, the market square went through a steady transformation that began subtly and became structured over time. While earlier chapters explored the producers and suppliers who arrived in darkness, this chapter focuses on what happened within the market square itself during those same hours. The assembly of stalls, the careful arrangement of tools, the placement of weights and measures, the silent routines of vendors, and the gradual creation of a functional marketplace before the first buyers stepped into the square. This preparation was routine for those who performed it, yet it was critical for the smooth functioning of the day ahead. Much of it was quiet, repetitive work that required familiarity with the space, patience with the process, and a sense of timing passed down through generations. The earliest to arrive in the market square were the vendors who needed the most time to assemble their stalls. In many towns, permanent structures existed only for a few established trades. Most vendors worked with temporary setups that they carried each morning. These stalls consisted of wooden boards, stands, folding tables, and fabric coverings designed to protect goods from sunlight or unexpected weather. The workers who assembled these structures did so with practiced efficiency. A vendor might position the legs of a stall by touch alone if the light was still low. Pieces of wood fitted together smoothly because the vendors used them every day. Tools, though simple, were kept in good condition because the stability of a stall depended on them. Setting up a stall required organization. Vendors typically placed their heaviest boards first, creating the foundation of the structure. They lifted wooden planks into place, checked their balance, adjusted angles, and ensured the stall stood firmly. A stable foundation mattered, especially when items such as pottery, jars, grains, or other goods needed reliable surfaces. Vendors who sold bulk items like flour or grain placed containers strategically to support the weight evenly. Those selling fruits or vegetables considered where sunlight would fall later in the day, setting up coverings or shifting the orientation of their tables to maintain freshness. After constructing their stalls, vendors arranged tools they needed for the day. Tools varied depending on the trade. A merchant selling grains relied on scoops and wooden measures, A vendor selling dried goods used scales, small cloth bags, or wooden boxes. A potter arranged ceramic vessels so customers could see the range of shapes and sizes. Metal workers who sold small tools placed their items neatly, grouping similar objects together. The systematic arrangement of tools reflected not only personal preference, but also traditions passed down from older merchants who had worked the same stalls for decades. Weights and measures played an especially important role in morning preparations. Medieval markets relied on standardized systems established locally, ensuring fairness in transactions. Vendors carried sets of weighted stones or metal pieces that matched official market standards. Before customers arrived, vendors arranged these weights carefully, placing them within easy reach. Scales were inspected for balance, with merchants ensuring the devices settled properly and the arms moved smoothly. Even minor imbalances could cause disputes during sale, so merchants addressed potential issues early in the morning. They cleaned the surfaces, wiped dust from the scale, and adjusted the ropes or cords that supported the balance. Fabric coverings, known as awnings or shades, were essential tools for many vendors. These coverings shielded goods from direct sunlight and helped protect delicate items such as herbs, cloth, or preserved foods. Vendors attached coverings to wooden poles or nearby supports, adjusting the fabric so it caught early light at the right angle. As the day progressed, they would shift these coverings to match the movement of the sun. But the initial positioning required experience, knowing where shadows fell at different times of morning, how the wind moved through the square, and how to secure fabric so it did not loosen during busy hours. Vendors managed space thoughtfully. The market square might seem open and flexible, but each vendor knew the precise area where they were permitted to sell. Markets had designated sections for certain goods. Vegetables might occupy one row, pottery another, textiles another. Some placements were determined by tradition rather than official rules. Families who had sold goods in the same spot for years often arrived early to maintain their position. Other vendors watched carefully, respecting established arrangements even without formal guidelines. The organization of the square ensured that customers could navigate easily once the market opened. Quiet communication took place between vendors as they set up. These interactions were brief but practical. A vendor might ask another to help lift a board, adjust a covering, or move a container slightly to prevent crowding. These early exchanges created cooperation without formal structure. While each vendor managed their own stall, they recognized that the overall efficiency of the market depended on every stall being assembled smoothly. Cooperation reduced delays and prevented congestion in the narrow pathways between stalls. As the sky brightened, additional vendors arrived. Some needed less time because their goods required minimal preparation. Sellers of small items, such as needles, buttons, or simple tools, often carried compact displays. They opened wooden cases, arranged goods in shallow trays, and set up minimal coverings. Even these vendors, however, paid close attention to placement. A well-organized display attracted early customers and allowed vendors to work quickly during the busiest hours. The arrangement of goods reflected experience. Vendors grouped items by size, type, or material so that customers could evaluate options easily. The pre-dawn atmosphere in the square was shaped by routine. Vendors performed the same sequences of tasks day after day, assembling stalls, arranging tools, positioning coverings, and ensuring that everything remained stable. This repetition deepened their familiarity with the environment. They recognized the small, uneven patches in the ground where stalls needed adjustment. They knew which direction morning drafts typically came from. They learned when the square became noticeably brighter, when the first customers usually arrived, and how quickly they needed to finish their preparations. Even within this predictable structure, subtle adjustments were made depending on the season. During winter, vendors arrived earlier because dawn came later. Cold temperatures slowed movements, so preparations took longer. Stalls required extra stability due to frost, and coverings needed tighter securing against harsh winds. Vendors used thicker cloths or oiled fabric to shield goods from frost. They also warmed their hands periodically, stretching their fingers before handling fragile items. Despite the discomfort, the routines continued, sustained by the need to prepare the market before townspeople awoke. In summer, preparations were shaped by different challenges. Heat affected perishable goods quickly, so vendors waited to uncover certain items until the moment customers arrived. Stalls positioned in direct sunlight required additional shading. Vendors placed buckets of water nearby to moisten produce or prevent herbs from drying. Fishmongers, in coastal markets, managed ice or cool water supplies carefully to protect freshness. Wooden boards dried faster in the sun, making assembly easier, but cloth coverings needed more frequent adjustments as the day progressed. Some market squares had permanent features that helped with morning preparations. Stone platforms, drainage channels, and raised edges made it easier to position stalls and maintain cleanliness. Vendors who knew the square well used these features to their advantage. They leaned boards against stone edges, anchored coverings to drains, or placed fragile items in areas least exposed to foot traffic. Their familiarity came from years of working in the same environment, observing how crowds moved, where sunlight fell brightest, and which areas provided the most stable ground. The sounds of preparation reinforced the calm atmosphere of the early morning. Wooden boards sliding into place, fabric coverings stretching, scoops tapping against containers, and scales being tested. All these sounds formed a quiet backdrop. Conversation remained low. Voices carried gently across the square, but never interrupted the sense of order. Early tasks were performed with a steadiness that reflected the vendor's desire to complete their setup before the marketplace shifted into its daytime rhythm. As the square filled with more vendors, the arrangement took on its familiar structure. Pathways between stalls became more defined. Goods began appearing in neat sections. Baskets of vegetables became visible under the growing light. Textiles were folded and stacked. Ceramic vessels were arranged by size. Grains were positioned in sacks or wooden containers. The market gradually shifted from a space of preparation to a space ready for commerce. One often overlooked aspect of pre-dawn market preparation involved checking goods for quality. Vendors inspected each item before placing it on display. A vegetable seller removed wilted leaves. A potter examined vessels for cracks. A textile merchant checked folds for dust. These inspections ensured that goods met the expectations of morning customers, who often arrived early specifically to find the freshest or finest items. The careful removal of imperfect goods protected a vendor's reputation and contributed to the overall standard of the market. Pricing decisions also occurred quietly in the early hours. Vendors considered factors such as availability, freshness, and competition. A vendor might adjust prices subtly, placing goods in positions that signaled value. Customers familiar with the market learned to recognize these arrangements. Vendors did not use written signs for pricing in most cases, so prices were determined through conversation. Still, the placement of goods communicated a kind of visual pricing system that regular customers interpreted easily. As the final minutes before dawn passed, the last stages of preparation took place. Vendors extinguished their lanterns or set them aside. They performed final checks of their stalls, smoothing coverings, adjusting weights, and straightening displays. They took positions behind their stalls, ready to greet the earliest customers. The square, once filled with movement, became momentarily still. Vendors waited quietly, knowing that within a short time, the calm atmosphere would change completely as townspeople began arriving. This final moment of stillness was one of the most significant phases of the pre-dawn market. It represented the completion of hours of work that few townspeople ever witnessed. Customers would soon fill the square, make selections, negotiate prices, and create the familiar energy of a daytime market. But for those who had arrived before sunrise, the most important work had already been done. Understanding this preparation reveals the efficiency and discipline of medieval vendors. They did not simply appear with goods when the day began. Their routines involved assembling structures, arranging tools, measuring materials, inspecting goods, and preparing the square for commerce. This quiet assembly ensured that medieval morning markets functioned with a consistency that supported daily life in towns across Europe. The smooth operation of the market depended on these calm, steady moments that took place long before the first customers arrived. By the time the market square had been fully assembled and the earliest light of dawn began to touch the roofs of surrounding buildings, another group of townspeople emerged to begin their day. These were the early buyers, workers, runners, household servants, assistants to craftsmen, and individuals whose routines depended on securing essential items before the rest of the town woke up. If the pre-dawn hours belonged to vendors, porters, and farmers, then the earliest moments of morning belonged to the buyers who arrived before the market became crowded. Their presence completed the invisible cycle that sustained daily life. Understanding who they were, why they arrived early, and how they shaped the rhythm of the morning market reveals another crucial layer of the medieval world before sunrise. For many households, especially those run by servants or assistants, the first order of the day was to purchase fresh bread. Bakers delivered to the market early or sold directly from their ovens, and their bread was a staple for nearly every home. Servants arrived before sunrise to avoid long lines and to secure the best loaves. Fresh bread held a practical advantage. It stayed edible longer, especially when properly stored. Because medieval households did not have modern preservation methods, securing fresh bread early ensured meals for the entire day. Servants carried baskets lined with cloth to keep bread warm during the walk back home. Other early buyers included workers starting long shifts. Many medieval occupations, such as stonemasons, carpenters, porters, messengers, and guards, began work soon after sunrise. These individuals needed to purchase breakfast ingredients quickly or collect simple foods to take with them for the day. Vendors responded to this need by offering small, ready-to-eat items: cheese pieces, dried fruit, nuts, small baked goods, or cuts of bread sold in pieces rather than whole loaves. Those who worked outdoors for long hours valued food that required no preparation, allowing them to continue working without returning home, and sent their workers to markets early as well. An innkeeper's reputation depended on offering meals to travelers throughout the day, and preparing those meals required fresh ingredients. Workers from inns moved through the market with practiced efficiency, selecting vegetables, herbs, grains, or small amounts of meat to prepare morning meals. Their purchases needed to be timely because inn kitchens had routines built around early morning travelers. If supplies arrived late, the entire kitchen fell behind. This connection between markets and inns demonstrates how morning commerce supported travel, hospitality, and the movement of people across the region. Craftsmen were also among the early buyers. Artisans who relied on materials that sold out quickly, such as leather, clay, textiles, or certain tools, arrived early to ensure they acquired what they needed. While many raw materials were obtained through direct trade rather than the morning market, craftsmen still used the market for supplemental goods. A textile worker might purchase thread, dyes, or needles. A metal worker might buy charcoal for the day's fire or leather straps needed for certain tools. The quality of these items varied from day to day, so early arrival allowed craftsmen to inspect goods carefully before purchasing. Small-scale traders who planned to resell goods elsewhere also appeared early. Some traveled from nearby villages, purchasing bundles of goods such as herbs, cheese, or small crafted items to sell later in the day in their home communities. Their livelihood depended on securing items early before prices increased or supplies dwindled. These individuals often belonged to a specific part of the morning economy, moving between towns on predictable routes. They were known by vendors, recognized for their early appearances, and valued for their consistent purchasing habits. Another group of early market-goers included households that used fresh produce to prepare goods for later daytime sale. For example, bakers who specialized in flavored breads, pie makers, women who prepared simple snacks, or families who sold cooked meals all needed ingredients early. Their work depended on preparing food before midday, making it necessary to buy vegetables, fruits, herbs, or dairy as early as possible. This segment of the morning market illustrates how many small businesses relied on careful timing. Buy early, prepare mid-morning, sell by noon. Not all early buyers were part of the workforce. Some individuals simply preferred early shopping because markets were quieter and goods were at their freshest. Older townspeople who wanted to avoid crowds often arrived shortly after sunrise, moving deliberately through the stalls. They examined produce closely, discussed recent weather with farmers, or compared prices with a measured approach. Their presence contributed to the steady rhythm of the early market, offering a calmer counterpart to the more urgent routines of workers and servants. The first footsteps of the morning also included children sent by their families to purchase simple items. Older children in medieval towns often participated in daily chores, and buying from the morning market was a task entrusted to them. They learned which vendors sold the best goods, how to inspect produce, and how to carry items safely back home. These early shopping trips served as informal training for adulthood, teaching practical skills through experience rather than formal instruction. Even in these small routines, the market played a central role in shaping the next generation's understanding of commerce and daily responsibility. Some of the earliest buyers were also individuals responsible for tasks outside the market square itself. Messengers preparing for long-distance travel needed food for their journeys. Workers maintaining city infrastructure, repairing roofs, paving streets, cleaning drainage channels, often purchased supplies or meals before beginning their duties. Their appearance in the early market reflected how interconnected the town's daily functioning was. Roads relied on masons, households relied on bread, inns relied on produce, craftsmen relied on materials, and all relied on the steady supply of goods provided by early vendors. The interaction between early buyers and vendors created a distinct atmosphere. Vendors recognized their regular early customers and prepared accordingly. A baker might set aside a bundle for a servant from a particular household. A vegetable vendor might gather herbs in advance for an innkeeper known to arrive at the same time each day. These unwritten understandings save time and strengthen relationships between buyers and sellers. The early hours, though quiet, were shaped by these subtle social dynamics. Negotiation was another important part of early buying. While markets often followed informal rules, early customers sometimes received slight advantages. Vendors appreciated early business. It signaled a strong start to the day, provided immediate income, and helped clear space for later sales. Some vendors offered modest discounts to their earliest customers, especially regular ones. This type of negotiation never became formal, but it shaped the tone of early transactions. The conversations were brief, practical, and focused on mutual understanding rather than competition. Another subtle aspect of early market activity involved securing favorable items. Certain goods sold quickly: the freshest herbs, the firmest vegetables, the warmest bread, or the most appealing dairy products. Regular buyers learned which vendors consistently produced the best items and arrived early to secure them. Over time, the market developed a quiet hierarchy among buyers based on trust, reliability, and familiarity. Vendors appreciated buyers who treated goods respectfully, paid fairly, and returned consistently. These relationships supported the stability of morning commerce. The first customers of the day also influenced how vendors adjusted their displays. Observing which items sold first helped merchants understand daily demand. If buyers consistently reached for certain vegetables or favored specific cuts of bread, vendors arranged their displays accordingly. These early signals shaped the market's layout for the entire day. Vendors watched carefully, noting which goods drew attention and adjusting their stalls to emphasize high-interest items. As the morning brightened, more people entered the square. The early buyers completed their routines and moved on to begin their daily tasks. Workers headed toward their job sites. Servants returned to prepare household meals. Craftsmen opened their workshops, and inns started their morning service. The early buyers were the link between the quiet pre-dawn world and the bustling activity that would soon fill the market. By the time the majority of townspeople arrived, much of the essential commerce had already taken place. Bread was mostly distributed, perishable goods had been purchased, and craftsmen had secured necessary materials. The early buyers had completed their part in the cycle. Their day had begun before others, shaped by necessity, routine, and the invisible demands of the town's daily functioning. This early layer of medieval life demonstrates how the market was not simply a place for buying and selling. It was a structured environment with its own rhythms and relationships. The first footsteps of the day, workers, servants, craftsmen, early buyers, set the tone for the rest of the market's activity. Their presence ensured that the marketplace transitioned smoothly from dawn to daylight, from preparation to commerce, from stillness to the full movement of daily life. The medieval market may have appeared simple at first glance: rows of stalls, baskets of produce, wooden boards, sacks of grain, and townspeople moving between vendors. But behind this apparent simplicity stood a carefully coordinated logistical system that unfolded in the hours before sunrise. The movement of goods from fields, workshops, storage rooms, and surrounding settlements to the market square required planning, routine, and a steady rhythm developed over generations. Everything that reached the market depended heavily on the use of carts, animals, tools, storage spaces, and organized pathways that guided early morning movement. This chapter explores that hidden logistical world and reveals how medieval people managed the transportation and placement of goods through calm, deliberate effort before the sun had fully risen. The first component of morning logistics was the transportation network used by farmers and rural producers. Roads leading into medieval towns varied greatly in quality. Some were well-trodden dirt paths hardened by years of use. Others were uneven routes with patches of mud, loose stones, or narrow passes shaped by natural terrain. During dry seasons, these roads supported steady movement, but in wetter periods, they became slippery and difficult to navigate. Farmers who traveled toward the town before sunrise relied on familiarity with the path more than on visibility. They learned the curves, slopes, and rough patches through experience, adjusting their pace without needing full daylight. Carts played a central role in transportation. Most farmers used simple two-wheeled wooden carts pulled by animals such as donkeys, oxen, or sturdy horses, depending on their resources. These carts were built for durability rather than comfort. Wooden wheels reinforced with metal rims helped them withstand uneven ground. The sound of these wheels rolling across early morning roads became part of the natural rhythm of pre-dawn movement. Farmers learned to balance their loads carefully to avoid tipping or unnecessary strain on the animals. Heavier items were placed close to the center of the cart, with lighter items layered above. Fragile goods, such as herbs or fruits, were cushioned with straw or cloth. Animals needed care long before the journey began. Farmers rose in darkness to tie harnesses, check the condition of their animals, and ensure the straps were secure. The quiet snort of an ox waking from rest or the gentle steps of a donkey preparing for the road echoed softly in farmyards. Animals moved steadily even before sunrise, familiar with the path they walked daily. Their calm pace created a predictable flow of goods into the town. Some farmers, especially those living closer to the town, carried goods by hand or used simple wooden sleds during winter months when snow or frost reduced the usefulness of wheeled carts. These sleds slid more easily over cold ground, allowing farmers to transport root vegetables, grains, or small barrels of produce. Even these basic tools contributed significantly to morning logistics, enabling movement regardless of seasonal conditions. Once farmers reached the outskirts of the town, they passed through gates managed by gatekeepers who followed consistent routines. Gatekeepers served as the first checkpoint in morning logistics. Their responsibility involved opening the gates at predictable times, ensuring safety, and sometimes collecting small fees or recording certain types of goods entering the town. They recognized familiar farmers and often exchanged brief greetings. These interactions, though simple, helped maintain order. Gatekeepers ensured that the early flow of carts did not overwhelm narrow entryways, spacing arrivals when necessary and guiding them toward designated market paths. Inside the town, logistics shifted from open roads to structured pathways. Town streets were often narrow, especially in older districts where buildings had been constructed close together. Moving carts through these streets required practice. Farmers learned which turns were easiest, which alleys led directly to the market square, and which corners required extra care. Some streets had cobblestones that made heavy carts rattle loudly. Others had compacted dirt that softened with morning dew. The sound of carts moving through town before sunrise served as one of the earliest noises signaling the start of the day. Porters played an essential role once goods reached the town. These workers were hired to carry items from carts to market stalls or storage spaces. Porters knew the market layout intimately and moved with confidence even in low light. Many porters worked in teams, coordinating who carried which loads and choosing efficient routes through the square. They lifted baskets, sacks, barrels, and crates using simple tools such as shoulder poles or hand carts. Their movements were quiet but steady, helping vendors position goods correctly before customers arrived. Storage spaces formed another critical part of early morning logistics. Many vendors did not bring their entire inventory each day. Instead, they stored goods in small rooms, sheds, or rented spaces near the market. These storage spaces served as overnight holding areas for durable goods such as grains, pottery, textiles, or salted items. Vendors arrived before dawn to retrieve items left there overnight. Unlocking these spaces, checking inventory, and transporting items to stalls required organization and attention to detail. Goods were carried in small batches to prevent overcrowding of narrow pathways. Some towns had communal storage areas maintained by local authorities, where multiple vendors could store goods securely. These spaces were especially valuable for seasonal trade, such as large grain shipments or pottery batches. The early morning movement in these areas involved repeated trips as vendors checked their goods, selected items for display, and prepared their stalls. Tools used in logistics were simple but effective. Farmers carried ropes, hooks, sacks, and cloth coverings. Vendors used wooden crates, barrels, woven baskets, and large cloths for wrapping goods. Porters used shoulder poles, wheeled boards, or hand carts made of sturdy wood. These tools had to be maintained regularly because they endured daily stress. Broken planks, frayed ropes, or damaged wheels could disrupt the morning flow, so workers took care to inspect tools before each use. The organization of the market square itself supported logistical routines. The square often had designated areas for unloading goods. Farmers drove their carts to the edges of the square, where porters met them. Vendors arrived at their assigned stall areas, and the transfer of goods took place efficiently. Wooden planks were placed strategically to support heavy items. Pathways between stalls remained clear during the early hours so porters could navigate with ease. These logistics depended on a shared understanding of movement patterns within the square, where to unload, where to carry items, and how to avoid blocking access. Seasonal changes influenced every aspect of logistics. During winter, darkness lasted longer, so farmers arrived with torches or lanterns. Frost required careful handling of goods to prevent damage. Animals moved more slowly, and carts sometimes slid on icy patches. In summer, heat affected perishable goods more quickly, so producers placed damp cloths over fragile items or transported goods in shaded containers. Even in warmer months, vendors delayed uncovering certain items until just before the market opened. The coordination among different groups, farmers, porters, vendors, gatekeepers, and craftsmen, formed a seamless network. Despite the lack of formal schedules or advanced technology, everyone knew their role. Farmers arrived when the gates opened. Porters waited for carts to enter. Vendors began assembling their stalls as goods arrived. Storage spaces opened in sequence. Even small delays could disrupt the rhythm, so consistency mattered. This cooperation was built not on written instructions, but on trust, routine, and shared understanding developed over time. The final stage of early morning logistics involved arranging goods in the market stalls. Vendors placed heavier items first, arranging them in stable positions. Fragile goods went on raised surfaces. Grains were poured carefully from sacks into wooden bins. Fruits were arranged to avoid crushing. Textiles were unfurled and folded neatly. Tools were displayed within reach. These actions, though simple, completed the journey of each item, from field, workshop, or storage space to its temporary place in the market. As dawn brightened the square, the logistical world faded quietly into the background. The carts, tools, and animals moved aside. Porters took their positions for the next wave of tasks. Vendors made final adjustments. By the time the first customers arrived, the market appeared ready, organized, and filled with goods, as if it had assembled itself naturally. But behind this smooth appearance lay an entire system of early morning logistics, shaped by careful routines and steady cooperation. Everything that reached the market at dawn did so because hundreds of small actions had been coordinated calmly and efficiently long before the town opened its eyes. While most of the town slept behind shutters closed tightly against the night air, there existed a smaller group of individuals whose work began when others ended theirs. These were the watchers, the movers, the silent overseers of the nighttime hours, the night guards who patrolled empty streets, the gatekeepers who regulated entry and departure, the messengers who traveled under darkness, and the workers whose shifts ran through the quietest part of the day. Their presence ensured that dawn arrived smoothly, that markets could open without disruption, and that towns remained safe and orderly through the long hours before sunrise. Without their steady labor, the early morning routines of farmers, vendors, and buyers would have unfolded in uncertainty. To understand the full world of the market at dawn, it is important to understand the people whose day began while others slept. Night guards were some of the most visible figures in this unseen world. Their duties required them to walk the streets at intervals throughout the night, carrying lanterns or torches that cast small circles of light around their paths. They listened for unusual sounds, checked that shop shutters remained closed, monitored storage areas, and ensured that fire hazards were minimized. In medieval towns, nighttime silence could be deceptive. Even small disturbances had the potential to disrupt the delicate balance of early morning routines. Guards moved slowly but consistently, following established routes that covered main streets, market squares, alleys, and access points. Their presence discouraged disorder and provided reassurance to those few who worked at night. Patrolling required attentiveness rather than speed. Guards learned to distinguish between natural nighttime noises, the sound of animals shifting, wind moving through narrow streets, wooden beams settling, and unusual disturbances that required investigation. Their familiarity with the town's layout allowed them to move confidently even in partial darkness. In stormy weather or during colder seasons, their task became more demanding. Wind extinguished lanterns, frost made cobblestone slippery, and extended darkness required patience. Yet the rhythm of their patrol ensured that dawn would arrive with the town still secure and its pathways clear for early workers. Gatekeepers also worked through the deepest hours of night, though their routines varied depending on the town's size and structure. Many towns kept their gates closed during nighttime hours to maintain control over movement. Gatekeepers monitored the entrances, ensuring that only authorized travelers passed through. Their small gatehouses offered limited warmth, but inside them, gatekeepers kept records, stored supplies, and prepared for any early arrivals. They rose before dawn, sometimes well before the first travelers appeared. Their preparation often included lighting lanterns near entrances, checking the stability of gates, ensuring that mechanisms worked smoothly, and preparing the tools required to open large wooden doors. The opening of the gates at dawn was a significant moment in the daily rhythm of the town. Farmers waiting outside listened for the sound of bolts being lifted, hinges shifting, and wooden doors swinging open. Gatekeepers coordinated this moment carefully, aware that carts and travelers began moving immediately. They controlled the flow of arrivals, allowing small groups to pass through while maintaining order. This early morning responsibility required reliability. A late opening could delay the entire market, disrupt vendors' routines, and affect workers whose day began early. Messengers were another important group that operated in nighttime hours. In the absence of fast communication networks, towns depended on individuals who traveled between settlements carrying written messages, small packages, or verbal instructions. These messengers began their journeys at times that allowed them to reach distant towns by mid-morning or midday. Traveling at night required careful planning. They carried small lanterns, knew the safest routes, and often traveled by horse to maintain speed. Messengers rarely stopped in towns during the night unless absolutely necessary. Instead, they passed by quietly, moving along main roads or pathways that connected settlements. Their work was essential in maintaining communication between markets, rural regions, and administrative centers. While most townspeople slept, messengers moved steadily across the landscape, ensuring that information, trade instructions, or simple updates reached their destinations on time. Nighttime workers also included those whose labor supported the town's infrastructure. These individuals worked behind the scenes to maintain cleanliness, manage waste, ensure the functionality of wells, and check on equipment used by vendors or craftsmen. Their routines, though not widely recognized, played a crucial role in preparing the town for the incoming activities of dawn. Some swept parts of the market square, clearing debris left behind from the previous day. Others inspected drainage paths to ensure water flowed properly. Maintenance workers checked wooden beams supporting permanent stalls, repaired loose planks, and repositioned structures that might have shifted due to weather or daily use. Their work ensured that the environment itself was ready for the morning. Certain trades also operated through the night because of the nature of their production. Millers, for example, often worked during nighttime hours, grinding grain steadily using water-powered or manually operated millstones. Mills produced flour continuously, as long as water levels supported the movement of the wheels. Millers monitored these mechanisms carefully, adjusting flow, rebalancing stones, and inspecting grain. When traders arrived in the morning to collect flour, the sacks were often still warm, reflecting hours of nighttime work. Likewise, bakers and their assistants formed one of the most active nighttime groups. Their ovens required long heating times, and dough needed patience and precision. Bakers began preparing dough during the late evening, allowing it to rest overnight in dedicated rooms where temperature and moisture remained reasonably stable. Before dawn, they shaped the dough, loaded it into ovens, and monitored the baking process closely. By the time the earliest market buyers arrived, bakers had already completed hours of work. Their ovens produced the first warmth of the morning, and the scent of baking bread signaled the slow transition from night to day. Transport workers also contributed to the stillness of the night. Some vendors or craftsmen stored goods outside the town and relied on transporters to bring items to urban storage spaces during early hours. These transporters moved crates, sacks, and baskets using carts or hand carts. Their job was physically demanding, requiring strength and familiarity with pathways. They navigated narrow alleys, avoided uneven patches of ground, and ensured that goods arrived without damage. Because their work took place before sunrise, they relied on lanterns or moonlight to guide them. Their quiet movement through the streets provided the link between nighttime production and morning commerce. Another group, whose work began under darkness, included those responsible for tending animals housed near or within the town. Livestock such as chickens, goats, or cows belonged to households, small farms, or inns. Their care began early, often before the market opened. Animals needed feeding, cleaning, and preparation for the day. Workers responsible for these tasks moved quietly through courtyards, barns, and storage areas, ensuring that animals remained healthy and that their products, eggs, milk, or other goods, were ready for delivery or sale. With all these groups working silently through the night, the town before dawn formed a complex yet coordinated system. Each group's task connected with another's. Night guards ensured safe paths for bakers. Gatekeepers allowed farmers to enter. Millers prepared flour for vendors. Transporters carried goods into the town. Bakers and craftsmen completed early tasks to meet morning demand. The calmness of these hours formed a foundation upon which the entire daytime market depended. Without the smooth functioning of nighttime work, the morning economy would begin with delay, disorder, or shortages. This hidden layer of medieval life also created a unique sense of community among those who worked at night. Night guards shared brief conversations with bakers during patrols. Gatekeepers exchanged greetings with millers returning from late-night checks. Messengers passed quiet nods to guards as they moved through the gates. Workers from different trades recognized one another, not through long discussions, but through the small familiarity of shared space during quiet hours. This understated camaraderie shaped the night in a way distinct from daytime interactions. The environment itself influenced the work of nighttime laborers. Darkness heightened awareness of sound. Workers listened closely for footsteps, the creak of wooden wheels, the hum of mills, or the soft rustle of wind. Lantern light cast narrow beams across stone walls. Candles flickered in small windows. The town felt larger, quieter, and more deliberate during these hours. Each worker became attuned to the subtle signals around them, adjusting their movements accordingly. This heightened awareness supported safety, efficiency, and cooperation. Seasonal changes intensified or softened these experiences. Winter nights were long, with deep cold that required extra preparation. Workers dressed in thicker layers, checked tools more frequently, and relied on close coordination to avoid slipping on frozen streets. In summer, nights were shorter and milder, making nighttime work somewhat easier but still requiring focus. Regardless of season, the routines remained steady and reliable, forming an integral part of the town's rhythm. By the time the first hint of dawn appeared, the night workers completed their essential tasks. Guards prepared for their final rounds. Gatekeepers positioned themselves to open the gates. Millers slowed their work as sacks filled for collection. Bakers arranged finished loaves. Messengers reached the next stage of their journey. These individuals transitioned smoothly out of the night as the early morning vendors, farmers, and buyers began their routines. The two worlds overlapped briefly, night workers wrapping up their tasks while morning workers began theirs. This transition represented one of the most coordinated moments in medieval towns. Without written timetables or precise clocks, the shift from night to dawn occurred through collective understanding. Night workers knew when to finish. Morning workers knew when to begin. Their rhythms aligned naturally, shaped by generations of overlapping labor. This invisible coordination allowed the marketplace to function without interruption, ensuring that each day began predictably and efficiently. Understanding the people who kept watch through the night reveals the depth of medieval society's dependence on quiet, steady effort. The safety, organization, and preparation required for the morning market began hours before sunrise through the labor of guards, gatekeepers, messengers, millers, bakers, and countless others whose work remained largely unseen. Their routines ensured that when dawn arrived, the town could awaken with confidence, its pathways safe, its gates ready, its goods in place, and its rhythm preserved by those who worked while others slept. In a medieval town, sound carried meaning just as clearly as sight. The shift from night to morning, from stillness to activity, could be heard before it could be seen. While the sky remained pale and indistinct in the moments before sunrise, the returning layers of sound revealed the gradual awakening of the town. For those who lived and worked in these early hours, sound acted as a quiet signal that routines were aligning, workers were arriving, and the flow of life was beginning once again. Understanding how noise increased at dawn helps us appreciate the structure of medieval life and the subtle patterns that organized each day long before formal schedules or clocks became common. The earliest sounds came from the workers described in previous chapters: bakers tending ovens, porters carrying goods, gatekeepers opening town entrances. Their movements generated faint noises that marked the first shift away from nighttime silence. A baker's wooden peel sliding across the surface of a heated oven created a quiet scraping sound. Porters walking across stone streets produced steady footsteps softened by early morning moisture. Farmers guiding carts into the town added the gentle creaking of wooden wheels and the rhythmic steps of animals. These sounds were not loud, but they carried through still air, forming the foundation of the morning's soundscape. Before the arrival of vendors and customers, the market square itself had its own set of early noises. Vendors assembling their stalls moved boards, tightened ropes, shifted crates, and arranged baskets. Wooden structures bumped gently into place. Canvas coverings fluttered lightly with the early breeze. Metal scales clinked softly when adjusted. These sounds reflected preparation rather than activity. They rose slowly, layer by layer, as more vendors arrived. Because the square was surrounded by stone buildings in many medieval towns, the sounds echoed slightly, giving even small movements a subtle resonance. As the number of workers increased, so did the complexity of the town's audio landscape. The noise was never explosive or sudden. It expanded steadily, guided by the natural pace of preparation. Far-off footsteps became more frequent as servants walked toward the square, often carrying baskets or cloth sacks. The soft murmur of brief conversations appeared as vendors greeted each other or exchanged simple updates. Goods being placed onto wooden tables added weightier sounds. The thump of a crate, the shifting of grain sacks, the placement of ceramic containers. These noises blended with the existing ones, forming a calm, layered atmosphere. Animals contributed to the gradual increase in sound as well. Horses tied near and shifted their hooves. Oxen pulling carts exhaled warm breath into cold morning air, producing steady, low sounds. Donkeys occasionally brayed softly, reacting to movement around them. Chickens in nearby courtyards stirred as the town awakened. These animal sounds did not dominate the morning, but they added to the sense that life was expanding outward from the quiet core of the night. One of the most distinctive sounds of dawn in medieval towns came from the opening of household shutters. As early buyers prepared to leave their homes, wooden shutters creaked open, hinges shifting with consistent patterns familiar to neighbors. These sounds varied depending on how well the shutters were maintained. Some opened smoothly, others required gentle force. The opening of shutters signaled readiness. Daylight was arriving, and its presence allowed households to begin their tasks more comfortably. Even before sunlight fully illuminated the streets, the sound of shutters hinted that daylight was close. Street sounds changed as dawn progressed. Footsteps increased in number and variety. Early footsteps had been soft and measured, belonging mostly to bakers or porters. Now footsteps included those of household servants, craftsmen, and buyers. People walked with more purpose, and the collective rhythm of footsteps on stone or packed earth became fuller. Occasional voices formed brief conversations, but these remained quiet, respectful of the early hour. A servant might call out a greeting to a familiar vendor. A craftsman might ask about the day's produce. These interactions remained subdued, yet they added human presence to the town's soundscape. As more light reached the square, small pieces of metal and would produce distinct noises. Vendors' organizing tools created a gentle tapping or clinking. Scales being tested or balanced made a metallic sound. Wooden ladles moving through sacks of grain produced a muted rustling. The removal of cloth coverings from baskets created soft fabric sounds. These small noises indicated that the market was shifting from preparation to readiness. The sound of market tools communicated intention. Vendors were not only setting up their stalls, but also preparing for interaction. The sound of distant activity also began to reach the market square. In many towns, craftsmen who worked outside the market area started their morning routines around the same time. A carpenter might move tools in preparation for a day's work. A tailor might open a workshop shutter, letting in early light. A potter might begin arranging items near a kiln or workspace. These sounds, subtle but steady, signaled that the entire town was awakening, not just the market. Water sources contributed to the early soundscape as well. In towns with public fountains or wells, early risers fetched water before crowds arrived. The lifting and lowering of buckets created rhythmic splashing. Wooden buckets bumped lightly against stone edges. The sound of water being poured into containers added a fresh, echoing tone that carried through still air. Fetching water early was a necessity for many households, especially before cooking or washing began, so these sounds appeared consistently at dawn. The increasing presence of animals within the town added another layer of sound. Chickens rustled in enclosed areas, responding to movement. Dogs accompanying early workers walked along streets, their claws making faint tapping sounds against hard surfaces. Horses tied near ends occasionally shifted their weight, causing tack to jingle softly. Unlike the midday hours, when animal sounds were often drowned out by human noise, morning provided a moment when these sounds stood out clearly. The atmosphere of dawn was shaped not only by individual sounds, but by the way these sounds blended together. A wooden cart creaking over cobblestones mixed with distant footsteps. Vendors adjusting stalls blended with faint animal noises. Conversations intertwined with the rustling of produce being arranged. The soundscape was not chaotic but layered, each new sound settling naturally into the growing rhythm of the morning. This gradual buildup reflected the calm, unhurried pace of medieval life before the market fully opened. As dawn progressed, the sound of wind joined the growing mixture. Early breezes slipped between buildings, moving through narrow alleyways and brushing against fabric coverings on stalls. Vendors listened to the wind's behavior to anticipate how it might affect their goods. A steady breeze might require reinforcing ropes or adjusting the angle of cloth shades. The soft flapping of fabric added movement and sound to the square. These natural elements reminded vendors of the constant relationship between weather and commerce. Breakfast preparation contributed to the rising soundscape. In inns and households, early meal routines produced noise. The stirring of cooking pots, the arrangement of wooden bowls, and the crackling of fires being rekindled. While these sounds did not occur directly in the market square, they formed part of the town's broader awakening. The market did not exist in isolation. It connected to every household and workplace. The returning sounds of morning reflected this interconnectedness, revealing how closely daily routines were woven together. Another significant sound during these moments was conversation, which grew gradually but remained calm. Vendors greeted early customers. Farmers exchanged brief updates with one another. Porters communicated quietly while carrying heavy loads. These conversations did not dominate the environment. Instead, they punctuated the morning with short, purposeful exchanges. The tone of morning conversation was distinct, respectful, practical, and efficient. People spoke just enough to coordinate tasks or confirm arrangements. By the time the sun's first light touched the tops of buildings, the market had reached a quiet hum of activity. The sounds were no longer sparse, but steady. Footsteps moved with greater pace. Vendors called out simple acknowledgments to familiar faces. Wooden structures stood firmly, no longer shifting. Produce lay arranged neatly. Tools were in place. Animals stood tethered. Buyers moved through the square with deliberate steps. The gradual rise of sound mirrored the growing brightness of the sky, each reinforcing the transition between night and day. Even as the town became busier, the early morning sounds differed from those that would dominate later. The midday market was loud, energetic, and full of overlapping voices. But the dawn soundscape remained measured and controlled. It maintained the peacefulness of pre-dawn hours while preparing for the intensity of daytime activity. The calmness reflected both the physical environment and the mindset of early workers. They approached their tasks with routines shaped by necessity, repetition, and familiarity. This steady rise in sound also carried social meaning. Residents who lived near the market square recognized daily patterns. They understood when the earliest vendors arrived, when shutters opened, when carts entered the town, and when the first wave of customers stepped into the square. Sound communicated the passing of time, offering a natural sense of rhythm even without clocks. People learned to interpret the market's returning sounds as a reliable indicator of dawn's progress. For night workers finishing their shifts, the changing soundscape marked the end of their duties. Night guards recognized when their final rounds were near completion. Gatekeepers listened for the first carts approaching. Messengers preparing for long journeys sensed when the town was stirring. These workers connected their own routines to the returning sounds of activity, using them as cues to adjust their pace or complete tasks before passing responsibility to daytime workers. Eventually, as the sun fully rose and the market opened for regular business, the early soundscape faded naturally into the background. Yet the significance of these early sounds remained. They represented the hidden foundation of medieval commerce, the calm preparation that allowed the town to function smoothly each day. Without the gradual return of sound at dawn, the shift from night to day would have been abrupt and disruptive. Instead, medieval towns awakened through a gentle process shaped by workers, vendors, animals, and environmental rhythms. The sounds of dawn revealed not only activity but structure, cooperation, and routine. They reflected the shared understanding among medieval people that each day began long before the majority awoke. The calm rise of sound prepared the town for what lay ahead, ensuring that the market and the community surrounding it entered the day fully ready and quietly organized. As the sky shifted from deep blue to a softer, pale shade, medieval towns experienced one of the most important transitions of daily life, the gradual strengthening of natural light. Long before daytime brightness arrived, even the faintest glow of dawn changed the way people worked, moved, and perceived their surroundings. For the vendors and buyers in the market, this slow rise of light marked not simply the beginning of the day, but the moment when countless tasks became easier, safer, and more predictable. The strengthening light shaped the rhythm of early work, affected how goods were handled, and revealed details previously hidden under lantern glow. It signaled that the town had fully awakened, even if the sun itself remained below the horizon for a few more minutes. In the earliest moments of dawn, the transition felt subtle. Workers who had spent hours relying on candles, lanterns, or familiarity with their tasks began to notice emerging visibility. The outlines of buildings sharpened slightly. Shadows became gentler and less defined. Surfaces took on new gradients that indicated the approach of morning. Farmers guiding their carts through narrow town streets could see a bit more of the path ahead. Porters carrying crates or sacks found it easier to judge distances and avoid uneven patches of ground. Bakers stepping outside their shops glanced toward the sky, assessing how much time remained before the first customers arrived. For vendors assembling their stalls, the strengthening light provided welcome relief from the limitations of artificial illumination. Working under lanterns or candles had been manageable, but far from ideal. Early morning light allowed them to see small imperfections in their displays, bits of dust to brush away, slightly uneven stacks of produce to adjust, cloth coverings that needed straightening. They could inspect goods more thoroughly, ensuring that the presentation reflected the quality expected from experienced traders. The simplest tasks, like aligning wooden boards or tightening stall ropes, became easier as natural light made edges clearer and distances more accurate. The strengthening light also supported the work of early buyers. Servants sent from households to purchase bread or produce could evaluate items with greater confidence. What they had previously judged by feel or rough outlines now appeared more distinct. Vegetables revealed their true color. Breads showed their texture. Dairy items displayed their consistency more clearly. Early shoppers preferred these moments because they could select goods before the crowds arrived, while still benefiting from improved visibility. Their quick movements through the square reflected an understanding that the early morning offered a narrow window of both availability and clarity. As light grew stronger, the market's organization became more visually coherent. Stalls that had looked shadowed and partial under lantern light now displayed their full structure. Rows of goods appeared more evenly spaced. The market's natural layout, shaped by tradition, familiarity, and silent agreement, became more apparent. Vendors could examine their surroundings, recognizing which neighbors had arrived, which goods had been placed early, and which parts of the square filled fastest. The strengthening light facilitated both coordination and awareness, allowing vendors to adjust their stalls in harmony with the rest of the market. The workers responsible for maintenance also benefited from the emerging daylight. Street sweepers could better identify areas where debris remained from the previous day. They swept corners, cleared small patches of dust, and leveled uneven spots. Workers responsible for the market's infrastructure inspected wooden beams supporting permanent stalls, checking for looseness or signs of wear. In some towns, those tasked with maintaining drainage channels examined early morning water flow influenced by overnight moisture. The strengthening light made all these inspections faster, more efficient, and more reliable. Another important effect of dawn's strengthening light was its ability to reveal the movement of people. In deep darkness, workers relied on sound and routine to navigate the market. As visibility increased, they could see others approaching, allowing for smoother coordination. Porters carrying heavy loads could step aside for passing workers. Vendors rearranging goods could anticipate nearby movements and avoid bumping into neighbors. Early buyers could navigate pathways between stalls more confidently. Even animals, horses, donkeys, or oxen, reacted more calmly as they perceived their surroundings with greater clarity. The strengthening light also helped reduce small risks associated with early work. Lantern flames flickered unpredictably, casting shadows that made tools and objects appear slightly distorted. In contrast, natural morning light created soft, stable illumination. Workers could handle knives, scales, or fragile goods with greater accuracy. Vessels that appeared similar in lantern light now showed subtle differences in color or shape. These distinctions mattered to vendors who needed to present goods neatly and to buyers who demanded reliable quality. The enhanced clarity of dawn improved the precision of both. One of the most notable changes brought by dawn was the reduced need for artificial light. Vendors blew out candles or extinguished lanterns gradually as daylight reached more of the square. This process occurred in stages. Lanterns closest to the edges of the market, where buildings reflected growing light, were extinguished first. Lanterns in central or shaded areas remained longer until dawn fully illuminated the space. This careful sequence ensured that no stall was left in partial darkness, even for a moment. The extinguishing of lanterns symbolized the transition from preparation to readiness, marking the market's approach to full operation. As daylight strengthened, the market's sounds also synchronized with visual clarity. Workers became more confident in conversation. Vendors greeted neighbors with greater ease. Buyers asked direct questions about produce. These exchanges, while still calm, gained slight energy compared to earlier hours. People relied less on cautious tone and more on straightforward communication, reflecting the increased assurance provided by daylight. The strengthening light encouraged a natural rise in interaction, setting the stage for the more dynamic atmosphere that would come later in the morning. The market stalls themselves revealed more detail as dawn progressed. Wooden boards showed their natural texture. Woven baskets displayed their patterns clearly. Clay pots reflected faint brightness. Herbs and vegetables took on vibrant tones previously hidden under dim light. The rich greens of early grown leaves, the earthy browns of root vegetables, the pale tones of grains, all became more visible. Vendors often used these moments to make final adjustments, adding a handful of herbs to fill a basket, smoothing the folds of textiles, or repositioning a jar to reflect light evenly. They understood that presentation mattered and that dawn provided the first true opportunity to refine it. The strengthening light affected the movement of animals in the square as well. Horses that had waited calmly through the darkest hour began to shift slightly, responding to the visual cues of morning. Donkeys pulling carts reacted similarly, becoming more alert as surroundings brightened. Farmers adjusted harnesses, ensured animals had enough space to stand comfortably, and prepared to move carts to designated areas for unloading. The smoother coordination made possible by improved visibility reduced stress for both animals and handlers. The early presence of craftsmen near the market also reflected the influence of growing light. Tailors retrieving thread or needles could see their selections clearly. Leather workers purchasing small supplies could examine quality more precisely. Potters checking their goods avoided the risk of overlooking small imperfections. These craftsmen relied on Dawn's clarity not only for purchasing, but also for determining how to begin their own workdays. The quality of light influenced how soon they could start detailed tasks in their workshops, such as cutting fabric, shaping clay, or engraving small pieces. For household servants purchasing goods for morning meals, the strengthening light was a welcome aid. They could compare bread loaves with greater accuracy, evaluate produce without guesswork, and negotiate prices with more confidence. These servants managed household budgets carefully, making early morning purchases essential. Better visibility improved their ability to select items that balanced cost and quality. Their choices influenced household meals for the entire day, so Dawn's improved light supported both efficiency and responsibility. The growing light also revealed environmental conditions that shaped the market's operation. Vendors observed the direction of the wind, adjusting coverings to protect goods. Farmers noted how long dew remained on produce. Buyers considered whether early sunshine might affect certain items later in the day. The strengthening light provided valuable information about the weather ahead, information that shaped decisions on storage, pricing, or display. Medieval markets depended on small environmental cues, and dawn offered one of the clearest moments for gathering them. As dawn moved toward full daylight, the market reached its most organized state of the early morning. Goods were arranged neatly, stalls were stable, tools were in place, and vendors stood ready. The strengthening light completed the visual transformation that workers had been building toward since darkness. The market no longer looked like a scattered collection of wooden shapes illuminated by lantern flicker. It appeared structured, intentional, and prepared for the flow of customers who would arrive steadily throughout the morning. This transition represented more than a change in visibility. It marked the official beginning of the day's commerce. By the time the sun's first rays crossed into the market square, vendors were already deep into their routines. Early buyers moved efficiently through the pathways. Porters completed final deliveries. Farmers guided their animals out of the square to make room for customers. The strengthening light made it possible for all these groups to move with confidence and purpose. Yet despite the increasing activity, the early hours remained calmer than the crowded period that would follow. The strengthening light belonged to a narrow portion of the day, a moment between preparation and full commerce, between quiet and energy. It was a time when tasks became easier, movements more precise, and interactions more deliberate. The market, though ready, had not yet reached peak noise or motion. It stayed balanced in this moment, shaped by clarity rather than urgency. This balance reveals an important aspect of medieval life. The day did not begin suddenly. It unfolded gradually, with each layer of sound, movement, and light adding to the next. Dawn's strengthening light formed one of the most crucial layers, bridging the gap between night's limitations and day's opportunities. It allowed early workers to complete tasks efficiently, ensured buyers could make reliable choices, and prepared the market for the busy hours ahead. By the time the sun finally lifted above rooftops, the transition was complete. The strengthening light gave way to full brightness. Lanterns were stored, shadows sharpened, the square filled with more voices, more movement, and more activity. The market entered its daytime life, organized, lively, and ready for the countless interactions that defined medieval commerce. Yet behind this dynamic scene remained the calm foundation built during the strengthening of dawn's light. Without that quiet moment, the market would have lacked the clarity, precision, and confidence needed for the day ahead. Dawn offered more than light. It offered order, structure, and the final touch that transformed hours of preparation into a fully functional marketplace. Thank you for spending this quiet time exploring the world of the medieval market before sunrise. If tonight's story helped you relax or taught you something new about everyday life in the past, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I always enjoy seeing which details stood out to you. If you'd like more calm history to sleep to, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss the next peaceful journey into the past. Rest well, and I'll see you in the next story.